and get everybody kind of back in spring training mode in the middle of the season. So the one thing they want to do, no matter what it's 162 games, 154 games, whatever it is, they want to be able to have spring training and go directly from spring training right into the start of the season. So we don't have that delay and that gap in there. And that's the one big worry I think that they have. There'll be less players in camp this spring. They're staggering the workouts, kind of like they did last summer, so they have less people at the ballpark at any one time, and have fewer players there and fewer staff. Minor league spring training is actually going to be delayed until after the big league spring training camp is over. So you're really going to have only the players who have a shot at making the big league club or probably headed to AAA will be in that first tier of players that will get down there to Florida next week. So it's all a work in progress. It's all changes seemingly by the day. So I think the word of the winter for John Mozeliak and the Cardinals was patience. And obviously that paid off with some of the moves they made here in the last week or so. But I think that's going to kind of be the buzzword for spring training and maybe into the start of the season too. Is we just have to see, how the medication goes, if the shots, if the vaccine is more available, if that kind of changes the parameters. They are planning on having a limited number of people at spring training games. Those tickets they still haven't gone on sale because there's some questions about the schedule. They're trying to kind of maybe move it around so you don't have to travel quite as far in spring training for some of those games and maybe reduce the number of games a little bit. But at some point, tickets will go on sale for spring training at a limited basis. They are still planning on having a limited number of people in the seats when the regular season opens. Cardinals home opener is supposed to be April 8th against Milwaukee. So they're hoping maybe 8 to 10,000 people, something like that, socially distanced, at least to start the season, which is about 20 to 22% of the capacity of the ballpark. So I think things are going in the right direction, but we still have to be patient and still have to kind of realize that this season is still going to be kind of different and maybe not quite as different as we all experienced a year ago, but still not what we're normally used to. But saying all that, I think the product that the Cardinals are going to put on the field when we do get playing is going to be pretty good. I don't know that I would have said that a couple of weeks ago, but a lot of things have changed. The latest news, if you didn't hear last night, early this morning, Yadier Molina is back. He's agreed to a one-year contract. Some of the details are supposed to come out from the team later today, but that it is a done deal. Yadi will be back on a one-year contract. Obviously, the latest in this flurry here, that all kind of began with Adam Wainwright re-signing. I think everybody agreed that was a great move, and happy to see both of those guys reunited. And I think now you can pretty much guarantee that they will finish their careers in a Cardinal uniform, only playing for one major league team, which I think is great news for everybody. Of course, the big transaction last week was the trade that brought Nolan Arenado in from Colorado, the Gold Glove, Silver Slugger, third baseman, probably one of the top 5 players in baseball. There are two reactions to the trade, and I'm sure there'll probably be some questions about this that we can talk about later on. But I think the first thing was I'm not surprised that the Cardinals traded for him because the fact that they've loved him for a long time.
Timing hearing aids.
There's Myron. Myron?
I had trouble with my computer, so I'm sorry it got in late.
That's okay. We're happy to see you. So, did you want to say anything, or want me just to keep going?
Keep going. I'm late, so.
Okay. Anyway, I was talking about the Arenado trade, and that's one thing we have to all learn, that he says the correct pronunciation is Arenado. It's been pronounced Arenado, and I'm probably guilty of that as anybody, but I'm going to try my best to always pronounce it Arenado, which is how he said he is the family correct pronunciation of the name. But the timing surprised me because of the contract that he had. And I think that the fact that two things, one, that the Rockies were able to kick in so much money, which is what made the deal possible from the Cardinals standpoint, and the fact that the Cardinals, I'm really surprised by the fact that the Cardinals didn't have to give up more in terms of talent, in terms of the prospects that they included in that deal. I think you would have made that trade even if you'd had to give up, a couple of your top prospects because of how good a player Arenado is, but they didn't. They really didn't give up any of their top 10 prospects in the deal. So it just kind of shows you how desperately Colorado wanted to move him and get out from under that, the bulk of that contract. So I think St. Louis fans are going to love him. I think he's going to be a perfect Cardinal player. I mean, if you see Paul Goldschmidt, I think you kind of see what you're getting in Nolan Arenado as far as personality, as far as how much he loves the game, how hard he plays, how much of a help he's going to be to the other players around him. So just a perfect Cardinal fit, I think. So it's going to rank right up there, I think, all time as one of the greatest trades in Cardinals history. And no disrespect to the players that the Cardinals traded. They're all okay players. Austin Gomber was the headliner in the deal. A couple of younger prospects, Hilarious Montero was a third baseman, and obviously an area of depth within the Cardinals farm system. And then Mateo Gil, who's a backup middle infielder candidate probably, but still a young player 2 or 3 years probably away from knocking on the door of the big league. So a very positive trade for the Cardinals all the way around. And then, just kind of having the dust settle a little bit from that deal last week when we get the news that they traded Dexter Fowler, which also came as probably more of a surprise because Fowler had a no trade clause in his contract. He had to agree to waive that. The Cardinals had to agree to pay the bulk of his salary this year and to get him to move to the Angels. He's reunited with Joe Madden, who was his manager on the Cubs when they won the World Series in 2016. So he was closer to his home in Las Vegas. So there's reasons why it makes sense for him to do that. But and I think it's probably a good move. It recommits the Cardinals to playing with their young outfielders. But again, another thing they've said all winter is that they were committed to giving those guys a chance. They didn't feel like really that O'Neill or Lane Thomas or some of those guys really got a chance to show what they could do last year. Thomas was one of the guys that was affected by COVID more than anybody else. So now they're going to get that opportunity, and I think we'll have a really good read after this season on how good some of those young outfielders are and what they means as far as going forward beyond this season. The probable plan, which again kind of written in pencil, is always subject to change, is that Dylan Carlson, now that the rookie who probably would have been slated for most of the games in left field, will probably become the everyday right fielder. Bader will still get probably the majority of starts in center, and then you'll see Thomas and Tyler O'Neill kind of rotating between left and center, I think, to fill up some of those other at bats. So that's one of the questions to watch this spring is how they divide up those at bats. The other thing that was agreed to last night, I should mention in the discussions between the owners and the union as far as the protocols were concerned, because it is considered kind of a health and safety protocol, they are going to go back to the 7-inning doubleheaders that they had last year. Again, I don't think, from the Cardinals' perspective, they played so many of those games because of the fact they had so many games postponed and canceled because of the COVID outbreak. So as long as we don't have any of those kind of situations again this year, you'll see fewer doubleheaders. But when they do play a doubleheader, they're going to be 7-inning games again. And you also are going to see the continuation of the rule where they're going to start extra innings with a runner on second base. Personally, I hate that rule. I wish they wouldn't have it, but I do understand the requirements for it. The other thing that was a rule last year that has not yet been agreed to because it's technically not considered a safety issue is the designated hitter. The National League at the moment is back to the old rules, having the pitcher bat, not having the DH. That is a bargaining chip for the union. It's also why they have not agreed to the expanded play. That the other thing changes, they have not agreed to an expanded playoffs this year. So you're back to the old rule of just 5 teams making it in from each of the divisions, back to the wild card game and things like that. So all those things subject to change. They actually didn't agree to some of those rules changes a year ago until the first game was already being played in the regular season. So there still is time for some of that to change, but at the moment, that's kind of where we are. The other thing we're waiting on as far as Cardinal news is concerned is the arbitration hearing for Jack Flaherty. They had the hearing last Friday. I suspect the arbitrator has already made his decision, and they probably have informed the team and the players union about that, but they don't want to release the results publicly because there's some other hearings pending this week for other pitchers who are kind of in the same situation as Flaherty is. So they don't want that arbitration ruling to kind of have an impact and have players and union and the teams be able to use that as leverage in their negotiations for those individual hearings. So I don't think we're going to hear the results of that until after those other hearings have been decided for some of the pitchers that are in the similar boat. So that's why the delay from the hearing until we hear the announcement. Some of the things I'll be watching at spring training is I want to see how Jordan Hicks is pitching. He opted out of last season because of the COVID outbreak. As he recovered from Tommy John surgery, he's a type 2 diabetic, so he was at a higher risk for contracting the virus and made the decision that he wasn't going to pitch last year. So all indications are that he's been able to throw on his own through the offseason. I think the extra rest has probably helped his recovery from Tommy John. So that's going to be a key factor for this club, I think, going forward, is how if he's ready to resume his closer role, it kind of knocks everybody else into the bullpen in another role. They have to figure out who's going to be the 5th starter. Chances, I wouldn't have told you a month ago that I liked Carlos Martinez's chances to win that job, but he apparently pitched pretty well in his few outings in winter ball, and then made a couple of starts in the Caribbean Series, where the reason that Yadi's contract was delayed because he wanted to play for Puerto Rico on that last week, and that concluded on Saturday, so that's why the deal got done yesterday. But I think Carlos probably, if he's healthy, will get the first shot at that 5th starter position. Alex Reyes is another guy that I think they like in that possibility of that role, but again, he's also very comfortable in the bullpen. So it's going to be a battle that we have to watch. Well, I think the leadoff hitter will be a question between either Dylan Carlson or Tommy Edman. I think you can make a case for either one of those guys. I think one of the more interesting competitions to watch as we go through spring training will be the battle for spots in the bullpen, because one of the realities of last season being so affected by the COVID outbreak is you had so many different guys come up and get a chance to pitch in the big leagues that probably wouldn't have had that chance otherwise, and they all probably by and large did pretty well. So you can make a case probably for 12 or 13 pitchers, not even counting the starting guys, who have a chance to win a spot in the bullpen, and they're going to be 8 or 9 of them. One thing they did decide is there'll be a 26-man roster to start the regular season. They can go to 28 in September. They will have be able to carry a taxi squad on road trips again, so they wouldn't hopefully have enough players to play a game if there was some players get infected and contract the virus. But they don't have the rule. One time before pre-COVID, when they decided to go to a 26-man roster, they were going to say you could have a maximum of 13 pitchers. They don't have that rule in place. So it'll be interesting to see if the Cardinals decide to go with 13, or because they have so many pitchers, if they will go to 14 pitchers. But that would mean, of course, that you only have a 4-man bench. So we'll see how that all shakes out as we go through the season. But there's going to be some pretty good pitchers we saw a year ago who probably won't end up opening the season in the bullpen, because of the fact that it's just going to be a numbers game. There's just not going to be enough space for any of those guys. And then as we head into the regular season, then we'll open this up to questions here in a couple minutes. But as we head into the regular season, I think the Cardinals, obviously based on all these moves that they've made in the last week, they will be the prohibitive favorite to win the National League Central. You know, the division was kind of on the cruise control or the snooze button for much of the winter. Nobody really did anything, I think, until the Cardinals re-signed Wainwright. The total amount of money spent on players coming in from outside into that division was like $4 million for all the teams combined. Going into that Wainwright signing has changed a little bit. The Cubs made a couple moves. The Brewers did obviously sign Colton Wong, the ex-Cardinal second baseman. So they've made a little bit of move, but the Pirates, the Reds have done nothing basically. So I think it is going to be an interesting division, but I do think the Cardinals will be the favorite. How they play with being the favorite is one of the questions that we have to watch, because obviously it's a different mentality a little bit when you know you're expected to win. You think you have a good club, as opposed to sometimes when you're just a challenger and an underdog and you can play free and easy because there aren't really any expectations on you. But there will be expectations on this team, but I think they're good enough to handle it. The strength of this team will still be pitching and defense like it's been before, but I think they do feel a lot better about their offense now than they did a year ago because of Arenado, because they expect more out of Dylan Carlson. You didn't really know what you'd get out of him going into last season. So I think everybody around Cardinal Nation is excited. I know it's, even if we're watching the games on television, can't go to the ballpark, even if we're doing everything on Zoom instead of being in-person interviews, it's still a good time to be a Cardinal fan. I think everybody hopefully will mean the start of spring. We're getting closer to getting everybody more getting vaccinated and almost on the road to normalcy. So let's hope anyway that that's the case. So I appreciate again Myron's invitation to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
So you can type a question in the chat box. You can raise your hand. So let's,
Question. Before we start that, I'm sorry that my computer was down and I'm late getting in. I don't know how much you were told about Rob, but Rob's been covering the Cardinals for like 41 years now. And right now, he used to be with the Globe Democrat, used to be my colleague. But right now, he is the editor of stlsportspage.com. And if you subscribe to that, I mean, he is full of knowledge about the Cardinals, about Major League Baseball. He has written autobiographies of Jack Buck, Ozzie Smith, Tony La Russa, Red Shandies, Mark McGuire, Albert Pujols, and he's been inducted into the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. So Rob's been around for a while and knows his stuff. My first question to you, Rob, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Is what do you think the lineup is going to be for the Cardinals?
Yeah. I think the interesting question is the leadoff spot. I would probably start with Dylan Carlson there. Primarily, he hit leadoff a lot of times at Double-A. He's not probably your typical prototypical leadoff hitter, but I think he's a good got good eye at the plate. I think he draws some walks as switch hitter. It'll be him or Edman. I think really pretty much are the two candidates, and whichever one is not hitting first, I think will be hitting second. So I think that's kind of they'll probably try it both ways in the spring and kind of see which way they like. Edman's obviously a switch hitter too, so Carlson has more power. Edman probably might hit for a little bit higher average, but I suspect their on-base percentages would probably be really, really similar to each other. I would bat Goldschmidt third simply again because that's where he seems to be most comfortable and would give them protection with the Arenado hitting fourth that he didn't have a year ago. I think the Cardinals went through about 6 different guys hitting cleanup a year ago. So that and then that frees up DeYoung to move down in the lineup, take some of the pressure off him. If he could hit fifth, he's probably your 6th place hitter. Then whoever's in the outfield on a given basis would be the others guys. You'd have O'Neill, you'd have Thomas, you'd have Bader, somewhere in that 7 to 8 range. Again, if there's no DH, then the pitcher would be batting ninth. That would be my expectation.
Jerry, did you have a question?
Okay. Yeah, I have a question, Rob.
Yes.
I noticed in the paper this morning they're going to slightly deaden the baseball. Do you think that's a plus or minus for the Cardinals?
I would think it's probably a plus because again, I think the strength of this team is pitching and defense. So they'll hit more home runs than they did a year ago because of Arenado. I mean, he's the 30 home run guy, 35 home run guy. I think Goldie can get back to hitting 30 to 35. Carlson, I think, could hit 20 if he plays on a regular basis. So they'll hit more home runs, but they need to just generate runs. I think that however they can do it, that the offense just needs to be able to put more guys in motion and generate runs. But anything that kind of keeps the other team from scoring would help the pitching, and based on the Cardinals pitching and defense, you keep the ball in the ballpark, I think that they would benefit from that. So I'm curious to see how they actually do that. I don't know all the technology involved, but I did hear that and saw that as well. So I think that is interesting. I'm sure we'll get a read on that in spring training too. The pitchers will probably have more comment about it than anything else because they're so particular about that grip of the baseball and how it feels in their hands that they can notice any kind of a minute difference in the ball.
Larry, you had a question. If you need to
Yeah,
unmute.
I did. Why did the Cardinals pass on Colton Wong, a Golden Glove infielder? I know they wanted to cut their payroll, but he signed for I think $6 million for Milwaukee, and he would have added a Gold Glove second baseman to complement Arenado.
Yeah, I think a couple of reasons. I mean, the first one you mentioned was the financial thing. I think they just didn't feel like they had a lot of places where they could make a move and open up a little bit of salary. I mean, they would have had he picked up the option, would have been a $12 million player this year. Now, could they have signed him again for kind of what Milwaukee did? Maybe, but I think they probably had gone past that opportunity at that point in the winter because of just not getting something done earlier. And obviously when you don't pick up the option, feelings get bruised a little bit. So kind of that probably entered into it a little bit too. Even he probably took less money from Milwaukee than he might have taken from the Cardinals. We don't know if they had the level of negotiations or not. And I think the second part is that they're really high on Tommy Edman. I mean, I think we haven't seen a lot of him at second base because he played mostly third and bounced around the field a little bit, but they're very confident that while he might not necessarily be as good as Wong right now from a defensive standpoint, that he's not going to be that far behind, especially playing that position on a regular basis. He's played it in college, he's played it in the minors, so he's not foreign to playing second base. And I think, given repetitions there on a day-to-day basis, he's going to be pretty good. And you're paying him basically about a tenth of what you would have paid Colton Wong. So, had they been paying Wong $12 million, I don't know. I mean, obviously the Arenado deal is structured so that they're not even really paying him anything this year. But I think going forward, it would have been a problem to try to have both those guys under contract for that kind of money.
Larry, I believe you have a question.
Do you think Carpenter will leave Florida with the Cardinals this year?
I do. But again, I didn't see Fowler going anywhere either. So he also has a no trade clause in his contract. I think he likes it here. I think he probably is, of the two, is a little more willing to accept a backup part-time role so he can stick around. I think he knows that he hasn't been the player that he has been in the past, the last couple of years. Obviously, he's the guy that's affected the most by the trade for Arenado because he would have been the third baseman because they really have a whole lot of other options. But I think he's close enough to the end of his career that I think he just wants to enjoy it. He wants the team to win. I think he can still be a productive role player as long as he accepts that role and plays a little bit in the field. There'll be a DH opportunity. We still don't know about the DH. Obviously there's discussions are still to come. Might get the DH back in play, which would then free him up for more playing time. But there's 10 games at least against the American League teams that would have a DH. He'll get probably some games at third to give Arenado a day off. He could play first to give Goldie a day off. So, but I think primarily his role will be as a pinch hitter. But unless they're willing to eat a lot of that contract like they did with Fowler, I just don't see a lot of interest from other clubs at this point. And I don't think he would really want to go to a lot of other places either.
Rob, Nancy would like to know where did you see Matt Carpenter?
Where do I see him? Just as far as his role on the team is concerned, I guess I think we just kind of covered that a little bit. I think primarily he's going to be a bench player, primarily a pinch hitter, spot starter. Hopefully, won't get nobody will get hurt. So it kind of forces him into the lineup a little bit, but just kind of be a guy that can help some of the younger players and motivate those guys from the bench.
Rob,
Yes.
The Nolan Gorman, who was one of the top prospects in the Cardinal organization, obviously he's the third baseman. Where do you see him going from here? Do you think it's going to slow his progress down?
I don't think it's going to slow his progress because I think his progress is going to be dictated by how well he hits. And it doesn't really matter where he's playing in the field. They'll find a spot for him to play. I think you're going to see him use some this year in left field. We don't know exactly what this minor league season is going to be like yet. I mean, they claim they're going to play minor league baseball this year. We didn't. Obviously, last year they had the alternate training site. So that's still kind of another question to be resolved. But hopefully they will have all four of the full season clubs playing here at some point, probably delayed to the start of the season. But I think you're going to see him bounce around a little bit. I think you're going to see him get some games in left field. I think you're going to see him get some games at second base. He did play second a little bit in the alternate side camp last year. So he'll still play some at third. I mean, he's your protection. Don't forget, I don't think it's going to happen, but Arenado still has those two opt-outs in the contract. So, there's always a possibility that he would decide to leave after 1 year, maybe after two. So in that case, you don't want Gorman to forget about playing third because he would then become that role there. But the other thing that's going to happen for him is I do think after the 2021 season, starting in 22, you'll see the National League have the designated hitter. I think that'll be a chip that the union has to play as far as the next CBA. The current CBA expires after the 21 season. And that's part of the reason why they didn't want to agree to the DH at this point in time, because that's a chip they realized they could have in terms of the negotiations during the next CBA, along with the expanded playoffs. So there'll be an extra hitting spot available for somebody starting in 2022. And Gorman could, even though you don't like to profile a 22-year-old player or whatever as a DH, it would give him a chance to get some at bats. But I suspect he'll probably be okay in left field. We've all seen a lot of guys play left field in the big leagues that weren't necessarily Gold Glove caliber outfielders, but they were there because of the way they could hit, and he might be one of those guys.
Do you think Albert will be traded back to the Cardinals to end his career here?
No. No. I mean, I think it's a nice sentiment, and it would be great if he could kind of take his final at bat as a Cardinal, but it almost would be more of a sentimental kind of move. I just don't see really a spot that he would fit in. He hasn't been a very good a player the last couple of years. I mean, I know he's got some milestone hits, but he's he is at the end of the career. So it would be nice sentiment to have him come back and end it here, but I'd be surprised if it happens.
Earl, do you have a question? You need to unmute.
I have his
Okay, here we go. Rob, I like the doubleheader scheme that they had last year. I thought it made the game move along. I really like the reduction in innings. I'm not so sure about the man on second base, but what's your thought?
Well, let me say this. I'm a purist. I'm a traditionalist. So I liked it. Let me put it this way. I liked it better than I thought I would, as kind of happens with most of these rules changes. I understand the point of it in minor leagues. I guess the one thing is we got kind of tired of it last year because they had so many doubleheaders because of all those games canceled. I think it's going to be more of a novelty this year because if they can play the games as scheduled, right now the Cardinals have no doubleheaders on the schedule. So it have to be in case of a rain out or in case of postpone a game because of COVID or something like that. So my guess is it's not going to come into play all that often this year. So it doesn't really have a big effect on the season unless they have another big, long, extended COVID outbreak that forces a lot of games being canceled. So I'm okay with it from that standpoint.
Thanks.
I think the one thing, and I do think it's still probably a limited time situation because of this. I think, once we get back to normal and once we get, 100% capacity fans in the stands, owners aren't going to want to go for 7-inning doubleheaders because of the fact they're going to want separate admissions. You're not going to have a traditional doubleheader again. You're going to go back to the split day-night doubleheader so they can have 2 separate gate admissions for those games. And I guess they could still be 7-inning games in that situation. I don't know, but that'll be something to be decided in the future.
Earl?
Do you have any optimism toward the agreement next year with the
Yeah, the CBA
owners and the players?
I would hope so, but probably no. Just based on the way the negotiations have gone, last year and this year, as far as trying to get these things during COVID done, they don't seem to get along very well. I think hopefully there'll be some cooler heads that will prevail and realize that a stoppage in any form, whatever it takes to go into next season, would be a disaster for the game when you're coming off, 2 infected years because of the virus. So especially if we're kind of back to normal as a country next year by this time, as far as, people being vaccinated and everything being opened up and stuff, it'd be a perfect time to have a new long-term agreement in baseball that we wouldn't have to worry about that going forward. But I'm never optimistic about any of these CBA talks. It just seems like they're bullheaded on both sides and it's tough to get a compromise. Hope I'm wrong.
So do we have some additional questions? Myron, unmute.
Rob, have you heard anything at all about the minor league season, what they're going to do?
What I know is that they're going to stagger spring training, and so that the players who are probably headed for the lower levels of the minor leagues are not going to come to Florida until the players who are going to be on the big league club and probably in most cases most of the AAA roster leave Florida. And that's kind of done on purpose so they would delay having so many people in camp at the same time. So if that happens, you're looking at those players coming in right about the end of March, basically probably having a month of spring training. So you're probably looking at the AA and single A seasons probably starting somewhere around May 1st would be my guess. What I've heard is that they would then play, normally those minor league seasons wrap up around Labor Day, around the 1st of September. I'm told that they could still play through the month of September. So they would still come close to playing the same number of games as they would in a normal season. But that's I think still optimistic at this point. I think that's kind of the hopeful plan and the plan that they're going to try to accommodate, but we'll just have to see how it goes. I do know they do not want to go through another season without having minor league baseball.
Rob, Nancy would like to know, do you think Yachty will be playing almost every game? And who is the up-and-coming catcher to take his place?
So, but if you know Yachty, the answer to that question is yes. If he has a uniform on, he's going to want to play. And that, I suspect that was probably something they talked about in the negotiations. It might be the reason that they only wanted him to get a 1-year deal instead of a year and an option or a 2-year deal. But if he was still a productive player last year. I mean, I know he's 38 years old. I know he's at an age when most catchers don't play, 130, 140 games. But I think the problem is they do have to kind of get another guy ready to play because we know at some point he's not going to play forever. The backup catcher this year is probably a kid named Andrew Kisner, who was up part of last year, up part of the year before, didn't really get much chance to play last year because of the shortened season. But he's more of an offensive-minded catcher than a defensive catcher. But I think there are reasons to think he can be a big league player. So they could still bring in somebody else like a Matt Wieters to be the backup. But I think Kisner's done everything he has to do at AAA. So I really think he deserves that spot. The problem is going to be if he has to sit on the bench for most of the time behind Yachty, you're going to run into a situation like we had a few years ago with Carson Kelly, where he was the up-and-coming young catcher and didn't get to play because of Yachty, still being productive. So they ended up having to move him in a trade, which obviously worked out from the Cardinals standpoint because he went to Arizona in the Goldschmidt deal. So you could see the same thing probably happen with the Kisner. They've got a kid named Ivan Herrera, who's 20 years old, who's going to probably be the everyday catcher at AA Springfield this year. He's probably the up-and-coming heir apparent to Yachty here in the next couple of years.
Shelley would like to know, does Yachty have any incentives in his contract?
We're going to get some more of the details of that today. It just broke last night that they had agreed to terms. I know there's not an option in there from what I've read. It's just a straight one-year contract. But in terms of the money and what incentives are in there, I'm not sure. That'll all come out maybe later today.
Susan would like to know if they have been able to get all of the players vaccinated.
I don't know the answer to that question. I think that they're still being tested. The new protocols that came out did call for regular testing. They're supposed to get tested before they go to Florida. They're supposed to get tested and then have a quarantine period once they get there. I don't, unless they were, now somebody like Hicks might be able to get vaccinated before others because of his high risk condition. But I think otherwise they're just going to be kind of in the same boat as the general public about when that vaccine is available to the general public, from what I understand.
And Jerry, you have your hand up.
A question for you. What sources do the Cardinals have, or all the baseball teams have, for the large salaries they're paying without any fans? I know they got television revenue, but what sources do they have other than television without fans?
It's probably different on a team-by-team basis. I think the Cardinals are one of the teams that probably rely more on that gate revenue from the fans being in the stands than some other clubs, because of the fact that they do draw 35,000 people a night, and it did take a financial hit on them. Gets back to the earlier question about Colton Wong. I mean, that was, as I say, one of the things I think they made that move because of the financial situation that the team was in. It's one of the reasons they're probably going to have a little bit smaller payroll this year. It's why they didn't want to take on Arenado's contract this year, because of that situation. Every club is financially is makes a lot of money. I mean, whatever source of income, but the owners all have money. So, I mean, they can understand, I think, and take a short-term hit as long as they don't think it's going to last forever. But that's one of the reasons why they wanted to delay the start of the season, was that they thought that if they waited until May to start, they'd have a better chance of having some people in the stands, even if it's not 100% capacity. But they're just going to take the short-term hit, I think, financially, knowing that hopefully it'll get better here in the future.
Roger would like to know, you indicated the Cards as favorites. Can you recap the rest of the Central Division as to who may give the Cards trouble, etc.?
Yeah, I think Milwaukee's probably the second best team in the division. I think Wong's going to help them, be a nice player for that club. They might still make another move or two. The Cubs pitching really bothers me. I don't think they have much of a depth at all in their starting rotation, and questions about, Rizzo and Bryant, they're obviously potentially headed to free agency here at some point. So, I think the Cubs are going in the wrong direction. And then the Reds, were probably a really contender team last year, actually made the playoffs in the expanded playoffs last year. But, they traded their closer. They didn't sign anybody. So I think that they're, probably again one right there with the Cubs, and then the Pirates have just given up. I mean, they've traded basically everybody that makes more than $1 million. So, they're really in tank mode and rebuilding mode. So I think the Cardinals are the clear favorite. Wouldn't surprise me if they're 10 games better than anybody else in the division. But you never know about the Cubs. But I would think my guess is the Brewers will be the second best team in the division.
John would like to know, can we count on Mike Shannon saying goodbye this season?
Yeah, he has said this is going to be his last year. He's going to do a reduced schedule of games, probably won't travel again, maybe to Chicago, but nowhere else really. I think he's anticipating doing about 50 games on the radio, and then he said that will be his final goodbye. Hopefully it ends with a World Series victory.
Yeah. Lenny said, Rob, is there still a threat of work stoppage? And if so, how will that impact Arendo's one-year deal? Could he still walk? And are there still players to be named later in the trade? And who do you think?
No, there are no players to be. It's a done deal. There's the players, the 5 players the Cardinals traded to him are the players that are going to go to Colorado. The Cardinals are still supposed to get either a player to be named later or cash from the Angels for the Dexter Fowler move, but there's nobody else involved in the Colorado thing. I think that the opt-outs still are in place no matter whether they play next season or not. There won't be any labor stoppage this year. If there's a stoppage in play this year, it'll be COVID related. But so he would have the option of opting out of his contract after this season for the first year, and then they added the extra opt out after 2022. And I think that would still apply even if they don't play in 2022. But even if there's a labor stoppage, it won't be for the entire season. It won't be. It can't be. So so I don't think that's going to come into play. But who knows? My guess is he's not going to leave. I think the only two that, based on the current economic situation in the game, I don't think there's a market out there that would give him a contract greater than the one he's got now with the Cardinals. And that's usually why a player opts out of the agreement is they think they can get more money somewhere else, or they really don't like the place where they're playing. And I think, he's going to like it here. So I don't think that's going to be an issue.
Neil, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. I had two parts to the question. First part is, were you surprised that they kept Jeff Albert as their hitting coach this year? And is he on a longer, short leash on how they're doing this year? And the second part to what Larry Buskin was talking about, I thought that Albert's contract had a $1 million per year, 10-year extension after he was done playing, which would prevent him from representing any other team. And I wondered how that affected his uniform, shall we say, that he would be wearing it going into the Hall of Fame, assuming he's a first ballot entry.
Right. Good question. Yeah, he does have that. As far as I know, he still has that personal services contract with the Angels after his playing career is over. I don't think that will impact the Hall of Fame decision. The Hall of Fame has taken a stance in the last few years that they basically decide what cap you're going to wear in consultation with the player. But they've had issues in the past with players and what it happened with Tony La Russa, and they ended up because, obviously his career in St. Louis was, just was good, but his career in Oakland was good too. So, I mean, if you had to pick one or the other, which one would you take as far as putting the hat on? So he went in without a logo on his hat. And my guess is that's probably what will happen with Albert as well. Then both teams can claim it, because obviously his best years of his career were in St. Louis, but he had a lot of his career milestone hits, with the Angels. So you could build a case for either one, but my guess is he'll end up being one of those players that goes in without a logo on his hat. So the Jeff Albert part of the question, a little bit surprised, but not really when they brought back everybody else on the coaching staff, simply because of the fact that, last year was such a strange year and you didn't really get to do anything. Batting practice was really limited. The work you could do on the field was really limited. The computer work you could do was really limited. So, it's kind of like the same thing with the young outfielders, not really wanting to judge them based on how last season went. I think they probably had the same attitude toward Albert. So this year will be a much more fairer test. And I think the other part of it too is that not only his work with the big league club, but they're really trying to kind of implement a whole strategy that they're trying to put into place throughout the system. So I think they kind of felt like they needed to give that another year too, since again, there was no minor league baseball last year. So we'll see how this year goes. Obviously having Arenado here is going to help his status because the team is going to be better offensively. But if they really struggle offensively, I think he could be in some trouble next winter.
Lenny, do you have a question and you need to unmute?
Yeah, I want to see if you agree with this, Rob. I had a conversation socially with a former major league hitting coach who told me the major league hitting coach's dilemma. This is kind of like a follow-up to Neil. He said that the problem is that with the hitting coach, when the minor leaguers come up to the majors, they're convinced they got there on their own ability and don't need a hitting coach. And the problem is with the veterans, they know that they know what they're doing and they don't need a hitting coach. And when they go into a slump, then they go to the hitting coach and blame the hitting coach for the slump. What do you think about that comment?
I think there's probably some merit to it. Yeah, I think, coaching at the big league level is hard. I mean, whether you're a pitching coach, a hitting coach, whatever, because the players do think that they have all the answers and figured out, and not 100% of the time, but, a majority of them. And I think part of the reason the player becomes a big league player and is successful at that level is because of his confidence, whether you want to call it ego or whatever. I mean, obviously they feel like they're good enough to be there. And only when they get knocked down a little bit do they realize that they do need maybe some outside help a little bit. So I think the successful coaches are the ones who can kind of break through that barrier with players and kind of, maybe not necessarily so much as far as technique is concerned, but almost more of as a motivational kind of guy as far as, restoring that confidence. Hey, you know what you're doing here. All you got to do is this and this and this, and, kind of make it seem like it's the player's idea or whatever to change a little bit. So, but, there is a reason why they kind of go through a lot of coaches at the big league level. I think sometimes, guys don't necessarily stick around in that job a long time because it is tough.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have more questions?
Hey, Rob.
Yes.
The saying is you can never have enough pitching.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with the Cardinals' overcrowded pitching staff already, why do you think might go after Odorizzi?
I think you just kick the tires on him like you do everybody, just to do your due diligence and kind of see, hey, if we were only able to do a 1-year deal, would you be interested? Or as somebody else asked me that question this morning about him, and as much as I like him, I think he'd be a nice fit. I think he would be kind of a luxury and not a necessity for this club. And right now, when we're talking about the payroll, especially with Yachty coming back, I think they're probably about maxed out where they want to be for this season. Unless Odorizzi would take a really low deal for this year and back it in the next couple of years, I think he's going to get a higher offer somewhere else. But I think you just kick the tires on it just to see, hey, if we could only pay you $5 million for this year and then pay you 15 in the next 2 years, would you do it? So, but I suspect he'll get more somewhere else. And then what do you do with Carlos? If you bring back Odorizzi, then where does Carlos go? Where does Reyes go? So there's domino effects on every move.
Do we have additional questions? John Reichman, you want to unmute?
Okay, here we go. I was wondering about the player, like Flaherty in arbitration, or any player that's been in arbitration. Do they come back to the team after winning or losing, especially losing, with a chip on their shoulder? Or
they could. Yeah, it's a case-by-case basis. That the hearings are private, so we don't know what necessarily is said. And I think some people, the players, probably take it a little more personal than others. But you should hopefully gear yourself going into that hearing, knowing that they're going to say, well, not necessarily negative, but try to present their case. Basically, they're trying to convince an arbitrator why he should be paid a certain amount of money instead of the money that he wants, and he's doing the opposite. His side, his representation is saying why he is worth all this kind of money. So it's not a perfect system. I think, there's a reason the Cardinals avoided hearings in the past. I think that Flaherty's only the second guy that's gone to a hearing with this team in like 22 years or something like that. Waka had one a few years ago, and the team won that case. So they do try to avoid it if possible. But I think Flaherty's the kind of guy, and you saw it the last couple of years, he wouldn't agree to a contract either. Even though he didn't have no leverage, he made the Cardinals renew his deal because he doesn't like the system, and he's trying to make a point. And I think that's why he didn't want to agree to a contract this year in arbitration either. So whether he wins or loses, I don't know that it'll necessarily affect him personally because he just doesn't like the system. But we'll see what happens. He's obviously the next guy I think that will try to get under contract for a long-term deal, whether that's this offseason or they want to wait till after they get the new CBA in place to see what the rules are. I know they're going to be okay going forward. I think in the next year or two, you'll see him signing a multi-year contract. Then we don't have to worry about his griping about the system anymore.
But the system is flawed. Do you think that? I mean, yes. Historically, do you know cases where it really, after arbitration, the player really wasn't happy?
I can't sit here and cite guys right now off the top of my head, but I sure know it's happened. Yeah, you never want to hear anything bad about yourself. I mean, you want to be able to think that you're the greatest, but again, the club is just kind of doing their best to try to control the salaries. The problem, the thing that's going to be interesting to watch as far as the arbitration system is concerned is I suspect that's going to be one of the areas that is addressed in the new CBA. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if the union tries to get arbitration after 2 years instead of 3, like it is now, because they realize that younger players are kind of getting the screws to them a little bit financially because they don't have any leverage. So I think they're going to argue probably to move that up a year. And it wouldn't surprise me if they also try to move up free agency to after 5 years instead of 6. So those are going to be sticking points for the owners. The arbitration was when it was established in Major League Baseball, was kind of a cop out for the owners who didn't like free agency. They thought they were arguing to get free agency later after into a player's career, and the union said, okay, we'll get arbitration in place then for after 3 years. There were only 2 owners at the time who voted against the arbitration system, and they were 2 guys that had a lot of experience in other businesses. One was Gussie Bush, and one was Charlie Finley, and they were the 2 who argued that arbitration was going to be more of an impact and negatively on baseball than free agency was.
Thank you.
Jay Dubinsky, do you have a question?
Yeah, other than Carpenter, the only utility infielder they seem to have is Sosa. Do you think they'll stick with that, or they'll try?
I think they're going to be in the market to try to add somebody as a middle infield candidate. Who that would be? There's a couple of free agents out there. There's probably some guys who are non-tendered by other clubs. I think actually a guy named Max Schrock, who was up here part of last year, just got DFA'd by the Cubs when they made their moves last week, so he's back available on the market. So. I do think they'll try to add somebody to that competition because, Sosa is a nice prospect. They like him, but I think they would like probably with somebody with a little bit more experience. You could play, Edmund has his versatility. So if you didn't do anything else, you could go into a game where Carpenter could play second and Edmund could slide over to short. So you're covered there with the players that you have, but I think they probably would like to bring in somebody else.
Lenny, do you have another question?
Yeah, Rob, with the use of the 7-inning doubleheaders last year, this year, the designated hitter in the National League, the impact of putting a man on second base in extra innings, how is that now, or how's that going to be treated in the record books? Are we going to have asterisks all over the place with, along with Roger Maris?
I don't know how they're going to do that. I mean, a 7-inning, we do know that like Wainwright at least had one complete game last year that was a 7-inning game. So it's counted as a complete game in his record, even though it was a 7-inning game. So the second base one, I think the interesting thing is it's not like the pitcher. The pitcher, if it's the same pitcher, starts the inning with a guy on second base, the run scores, it's not counted as an earned run for the pitcher. So there is some kind of weird, he gave up a run, but it wasn't an earned run. So they did still get the loss. So there are going to be some change differences there, but how it's treated as far as the asterisks and stuff, I don't know. I really haven't heard that, but it makes a difference for sure.
Yeah.
Rob, you know that the as far as the complete game goes, a pitcher pitches 5.5 innings and it's rained out. The rest of the game is rained out. I mean, that's still counted as a complete game.
Yeah, it's not counted as a no-hitter or a perfect game anymore. It has to, but it is counted as a complete game. Yeah. So, but they try not to do that anymore if they can help it. And I think some of those games just become suspended. Then they try to finish them later. So.
Do we have any more questions, or are we about to wrap up? I think.
Hey, Rob, I just want to remind everybody that Rob does that, what is it called, a blog or whatever you do every day, the stlsportspage.com. And if you guys subscribe to that or go on that, you'll find out just how informative Rob is.
And you also could go on there and you could sign up. You could go there and sign up for our free newsletter too, which is then sent to your email whenever there's any. We do like one a week or one every couple of weeks, depending on what the news of the day is. Put our links to our stories and stuff like that in that newsletter. So you can sign up at the website stlsportspage.com and get our just sign up for the free newsletter. So.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
So. And we'll have, full reports from spring training. I'm going to be there, whatever we're allowed to do. We're not sure yet, but I'm going to be there anyway, just in case to see what happens. So we'll have coverage from Jupiter starting next week.
Well, Rob, we appreciate you coming on. It was great. You were very informative, and I'm sure everybody enjoyed having you on today.
I appreciate you asking me. So as I said before you got on the call there, that this looked like a crowd that probably would remember the Globe Democrat and remember when St. Louis was a 2-newspaper town. So been doing this for a long time and appreciate your friendship for all those years. And it was fun. I enjoyed it. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you so much. Everybody have a good day. Thank you so much, Rob.
My pleasure. Rob. Thank you. Everybody have a good day.
Bye.